When you think of classic cars in America, you probably think Ford Mustang. There are faster classics, there are better built classics, there are more common classics, there are rarer classics. But none of them are as do-it-all fun as a Mustang. I had a Mustang once. I had a 65 Fastback that was most of a Shelby clone. 350 bits on it, R-panel gauges. Cool stuff. It did not feel anything like this. That's what's neat about Mustangs. They're basically a blank canvas. Put a straight six and an automatic in one, skinny tires. It is grandma going to church in 1965. You put a small block and a 4-speed and, I don't know, screw around with the front suspension geometry a little like Carroll Shelby did. This is a bona fide sports car that feels like a sports car. This is somewhere in the middle. This has a small V8 in it, 260, a 3-speed, but otherwise it's just what the British call a cooking car, right? So we're going to the grocery, tooling around town, has a long mechanical clutch throw. Steering is relatively light, but has a decent amount of feel. The 260 gets out of its own way. It's not what anybody would call fast, but it feels sprightly. The 3-speed is the same basic gearbox as the 4-speed. They're both top loaders. They both feel mechanical, durable, like you can rail on them. They're satisfying cars to drive, but you have to think about where they came from and what they mean. But they're a little cheerier than something like a Camaro, right? A little more egalitarian. Not that there's anything wrong with a Camaro, just that Mustang is a completely different personality while somehow being the same basic idea. Over the first decade of production, Mustangs didn't really change much, which means that you can basically pick a Mustang based on which styling you want, model year, and which driveline you want. If you want something that drives more like a sports car, maybe has a little more investment potential, GT350 or GT500 might be for you. If you just want a good-looking car that's tidy and dainty and reminds you of everything that it was to begin with, the early cars are a great buy. One way or the other, there is no bad first-generation Mustang. It just comes down to what you want out of the car. Take yourself back to the heady days of the early 1960s when all the baby boomers were either coming of age, had a driver's license, getting older, or had some money. Pick your poison. A guy at Ford looked around and realized they were going to want something small and sporty and interesting. This came out of that. He took one of their economy cars, the Ford Falcon, slapped a bunch of snazzy styling touches on it, and built a legend. Now, that guy's name was Lee Iacocca, and he would later go on to do a bunch of things, up to and including inventing the minivan and pretty much running Detroit for a bit. But nothing he did compares to this. This car kicked off a movement. Cars of this size, with a lot of power and not a lot of wheelbase, were known as pony cars. This led to the Chevrolet Camaro, it led to the Trans Am series, it led to an awful lot of really cool things, but at the core, it's just a Ford Falcon in a different body. The crazy thing is, it's special in spite of that. The thing is, everybody at Ford knew this car was going to be a big deal. Iacocca on down to the designers, even the guys at the test track. Anywhere they went with prototypes, they were typically mobbed, and that doesn't often happen with new cars. They believed this thing was going to be such a big deal that they launched it at the World's Fair in April of 1964. First cars off the production line came out in the middle of the year. They were technically 1965 models, but everybody calls them 1964 and a half because they were mid-year introductions. So what we have here is a very, very simple car. Like a Camaro, it's basically just a motor, a transmission, a rear axle, a really simple front suspension, and not much else. Every corner garage in every town in America can work on a 60s Mustang. By and large, what you want to look for, though, is something like originality, because there are a lot of them, they're all modified a lot. Something like a straight body without a lot of rust, and something like a healthy driveline. Beyond that, there are a billion permutations of these things in terms of what the factory made, what people did in the aftermarket, and everything in between. If you're looking to get into a classic car and you've never had one before, this is probably your best bet. There are so many variants of these things, from straight six cars with an automatic to massively powerful Shelbys that don't have enough tire and enough brake and are fun everywhere, that if you figure out what you want to do with the car and work backward from there, you can find a Mustang that fits your needs and your budget. So like most things from this era, especially most things from Detroit from this era, Mustangs rust. Mustangs rust in large part because they weren't really rust-proof from the factory. The factory zinc-plated some stuff, but it didn't really make much of a difference. If there is a spot on this car where two panels of metal come together, it will probably rust. You want to check all of this, the frame rails, wheel arches, pretty much everything. They rust so badly, in fact, that everything on the car has been reproduced up to and including whole body shells. This happens to be a really straight restoration of a really early car. It's really nice to see. But in general, most of the cars out there at some point have had some bodywork. They got used. They made a lot of them. They were inexpensive to begin with, and they were designed to be driven every day. So people did that. And when you drive a Mustang like this every day, it just rusts. There are thousands and thousands of less than perfect Mustangs that were somebody's Sunday driver or grandma took to church. And they're not perfect, but that's where the meat of the market lies. Those things are deeply affordable. The concours people and the vintage racers and everybody else gets turned off by them and walks away because they're not perfect spec or they're not perfectly straight or they've been screwed with in some form or fashion. But ultimately, there are a lot of them out there because they built so many of these. It's like buying a Camaro or anything else. Don't be afraid to be patient and look for the car that works for you. You know, if you want a 4-speed V8 car with a K code that never was restored, look for it. If you just want a nice Sunday cruiser and you're dead set on one thing, you want a notchback or you absolutely have to have a fastback or have to have a convertible, you know, let some of the other things slide and find a good straight example of what you're looking for. There are a lot of them. You can afford to be picky.
Early Ford Mustangs are plentiful enough that they're still one of the most affordable ways to get into classic cars. Prices for most models have stayed pretty steady over the last few years, and a 1965 Mustang with a 2-barrel 260 V8 cost about $15,000 in 2013. As of late 2020, that price has climbed just a little to $16,000. As always, values change over time, so please go to Hagerty.com/valuation tools in order to get the most detailed and up-to-date information.
One of the joys of a Mustang is that they make everything for it. If you want every single part factory correct to turn your car into a Shelby GT350 clone, you can do that. If you want to make it exactly as it rolled off the line, you can do that too. If you want to turn it into anything Ford produced or anything Ford didn't produce, there is an aftermarket and a bunch of factory endorsed parts, and they are all mostly affordable. This is not an expensive car to maintain. Again, it's egalitarian. Now, should you buy one? Well, that depends on whether or not you like Mustangs, because really, you're either a Mustang person or you aren't. But there is a situation where the answer is almost definitely yes. Let's say you're getting into classic cars, you don't really know what you like, you don't really know what you want, you don't even know if you want an old car, but you'd like to try something. This is perfect for you. It's perfect because it's reliable, there are parts everywhere, it's a good summary of what old car ownership is like. You won't encounter a problem you can't solve with the help of your local mechanic, but it feels drastically different from a modern car. It's not exotic, but it feels like you made a special choice to own something that took a little bit of effort and a little bit of taste, but you're not reaching. And the best way to try it is to start with a Mustang.